Porto Mar, a Tribuna. Oferecimento AMA. Associação Comercial de Santos. Bauline. Concais. Ecoporto Santos. Eldorado Brasil. Praticagem São Paulo. E São Marco Advogados.
Uma boa tarde a todos que estão nos assistindo em mais uma edição do webinar Porto Mar 2020, promovido pelo Grupo Tribuna. Esse evento, na verdade, integra o projeto Porto Mar 2020 do Grupo Tribuna, que debate com autoridades, personalidades e especialistas a situação dos portos durante esse período de pandemia, o período de o coronavírus, e abordando também os impactos dessa pandemia, tanto na comunidade portuária, como também nas operações de comércio exterior e nas próprias atividades portuárias, tanto no Brasil e também no mercado internacional. E nesta edição do webinar Porto Mar, eu recebo aqui a senhora Tessa Major, que é a vice-presidente para a América do Sul e América Central da Associação Internacional de Portos, a IAPH, International Association of Port and Harbors, uma das principais entidades do setor portuário. A Tessa, além disso daí, também é diretora de inovações do Porto do Açu. E também está à frente de um grupo de estudo de sustentabilidade do setor portuário. E isso através da sua vice-presidência no IAPH. Nesse webinar, nós vamos debater como o IAPH está vendo os impactos dessa pandemia no setor portuário mundial, especificamente na América do Sul e na América Central, que é a área de atuação da Tessa Major, e também as expectativas do IAPH e da Tessa pontualmente para a saída, uma solução dessa pandemia, como os portos vão sair do cenário desse pós-crise. A Tessa, na verdade, se comunica bem melhor em inglês, vai ser feito em inglês. Tessa, again, good afternoon. Thanks again for your presentation, for your participation here in the webinar Porto Mar 2020, and it's a pleasure to have you here and be welcome.
Well, thank you for asking me to share this presentation with all of you and the participants. To the participants, thank you for taking time out of your schedule to attend this webinar, because I understand under COVID circumstances, scheduling can sometimes be a little bit challenging. So thank you in advance for taking the time to participate in this webinar. So the presentation that I have prepared, in reality, it has 4 big blocks that could hopefully lead into a very positive discussion. So I will start with explaining a little bit what is IAPH specifically, what is the role of ports under COVID circumstances, the COVID task force itself that I'm chairing on behalf of IAPH and on behalf of Porto do Açu, and what trends that we see today in the port community and in the maritime business. So if you could move to the next slide, please.
Okay.
Well, while we're figuring out the technical situation, I can already start with explaining what is IAPH. So IAPH is the International Association of Ports and Harbors. It has above 200 different members, and it represents about 90 different countries, which is equivalent to 60% of the global trade volumes and 80% of the container volumes. So it's a very big organization. And that also is part of the power of IAPH, because it brings a lot of different points of views, a lot of different types of knowledge and best practices together to provide proper guidance and leadership for the ports who may need it or who may be looking for it. Another big advantage of IAPH is effectively their relationship with other international organizations. As such, they have an advisory role to IMO, for instance, and they have very close relationships with the International Chamber of Shipping, with the International Association of Classification Societies, etc. So it helps in the overall alignment within maritime trade and within the maritime business. And you will see later on that even under COVID circumstances, this amplifies this role very well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. This is an overview of the board, and you can see my pretty picture there. I don't do pictures very well, but you can see mostly that I am honored to be member of such a board. You see Tessa Major, which is the CEO of Hamburg, which is the third largest port in Europe. You see Hadiza from Nigeria. Nigeria is obviously the fast growing country in Africa. So these are really top executives in maritime business and in port business. So for Porto do Açu and for myself, it was a very big honor to be elected, because to become vice president, you need to be elected by the members you are representing. And we also view it as a stamp of approval and a quality stamp of what Porto do Açu is doing. Porto do Açu is a rather young port. We've been up and running for 6 years and growing on an annual basis. But it is amazing to be able to, at this stage, lock arms with these top leaders of industry and exchange our best practices with them as well. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I just wanted to mention here the Worldport Sustainability Program, because it's one of the more successful programs of IAPH. So it used to be called the Worldport Climate Initiative. In 2017, it was revamped a little bit to make a true connection with the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. These goals have been clustered, as you can see, in 6 different groups. And 2 weeks ago, they effectively published their first sustainability report on global ports as a whole. It's quite an interesting report to see how the priorities may or may not differ in certain regions. For sure, the major challenge of ports today is the community outreach and the port-city dialogue, which we also see in Porto do Açu. Our relationship with the community, our role as community builder is very, very much important. It's not just important because 70% of our 7,000 employees come from the region, but we believe that we can grow only by cooperating. We grow hand in hand, because a port, after all, is an economical engine for the region. And this role as a community builder, we take very seriously. And particularly now during COVID, when we discuss humanitarian actions, you can see that we've tried to do our utmost to support our community to the wider extent. So if you could go to the next slide. So basically, I want to explain a little bit to all of you what is really the drivers behind the positioning of a port, any port, during this COVID crisis. So first of all, we all understand the essential role of ports. We are the in and out of very important goods and very important supplies. Today, predominantly food supplies and predominantly medical supplies. So keeping the ports up and running is very important globally. Next to that, we also see that we are a part of a larger business ecosystem. So having the port up and running is not sufficient. We also need to understand and ensure that the connected logistics are still working properly. Being it road, being it rail, being it inland shipping, that still needs to be able to function properly for the port to have its function, for the trade to keep on going, and to ensure that everybody has access to food, medical supplies, fuel, and other raw materials. So this positioning of we are essential in this overall global supply chain, I think this is a very important mindset. So in the beginning of the crisis, you could see a lot of movements of ports trying to explain this to their government, to ensure that the government understands that, and as far as they didn't already, and to also amplify this voice to, for instance, the International Maritime Organization. And in that respect, IAPH is one of these drivers for this consolidated voice to the larger associations. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I just wanted to highlight quickly that what Porto do Açu is doing, as I mentioned to you before, the community builder, it is very much aligned with our core values. Our core values are very important to us as a company, but they're also very important to each employee. So what we are doing is not just the company that is doing it. It is everybody that is connected to Porto do Açu in line with our values, trying to do the best that we can within this crisis by being proactive, by taking care of our community, by taking care of our employees, while ensuring that the business continues, that the port remains operational. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So, and this is a little bit more detail of our role as a community builder. I think, well, in a nutshell, I think the most important thing that we've done that can amplify or exemplify our role as community builder is the wide realm of humanitarian actions that we've done so far. And so the humanitarian actions, they keep growing, we keep doing more, but so far we've already donated close to 100,000 different pieces of protective gear to the hospitals in the area of our port, about 5,000 face masks to the local community specifically. And effectively today, we returned 15 respiratory equipment, so ventilators to be used in the hospitals. So these were broken down. So we took them from the hospitals, we fixed them, and now we returned them. So obviously this is very important in the, handling the situation and treating people that are infected. We've also supported our local community, basically the local producers, by buying around 2 million tons of their foods, of their produce, to then donate it to charity. This is an evolving trajectory. We are looking continuously what else we can do to support the community. And as a last point, I would also like to mention that we have donated 2.5 million together with Equinor and SBM to the IDOR program. And the IDOR program is basically they're designing an app to ease the tracking, the tracing, the monitoring, and the testing of people. So this will be very important in moving forward and getting on top of the curve. Yeah. So if you could go to the next slide, please. And then you come to the COVID task force specifically. So Porto do Açu, despite being quite young, is already a very international port. So the Port of Antwerp is one of our shareholders, but we also have cooperation agreements with the Port of Houston and with the Port of Guangzhou. So when COVID started to arrive, and even prior to arrival in Brazil, I was contacting them and others, other ports within my network to understand how are they handling the situation. Because obviously a speedy decision-making process and a speedy implementation of preventative and mitigation measures are very important. It determines your success of your actions. So we try to get smarter from the best practices that they were already doing, and we were benchmarking, okay, what is already going on in Porto do Açu? Are we on the right track? Can we make some improvements? Can we make some adjustments? And this information was quasi immediately shared with our port community. So with the terminal operators operating in our port, the vessels calling our port, etc. Based on that exercise, my friends from IAPH said, maybe it's a good idea to make this a little bit bigger, a little bit more ample, to get more support of different ports and to provide a larger scale type of guidance. So as such, the task force was created and they asked me to be chairperson of the task force. So you can see that the participation of the ports, you have Busan, you have Guangzhou, Mombasa, Los Angeles, so it's covering all the regions globally. The list here doesn't mention all the ports that are providing information to the portal that we then process. They do not include all the ports that have been responding to our port perimeter. So if you could go to the next slide. This shows basically the main two deliverables of the task force. So on the one hand, you have the port guidance document, where we have a consolidation of the best practices of what's going on globally. Obviously, as a port, you will need to decide what is more relevant for you. but it gives you a menu of choices that have been already chosen by other ports and are effectively implemented. So on Monday, we launched a revision, or actually an edition of the port guidance document, very much focusing at going back to the new normal, getting people that are now working from home back into the office. How do you do this? What are the best practices in that? Because obviously you see that in Europe and in Asia, this is already happening. They are already returning back to the new normal. And then the other deliverable of the task force is the port perimeter, or the port impact, economic impact assessment. So what we do is we send out a weekly survey. Thus far, it's been a weekly survey with 6 main questions. And then we make a consolidated report to see what's going on, what the trends are in the different ports globally. So if you could go to the next slide, please. This is actually a preview, very quick preview of the new port perimeter report that will be published tomorrow. So usually it was published on a weekly basis on Friday. Starting from next week onwards, it will be bi-weekly, because we see more and more a divergence of the situation in the different regions. So Europe is very much stabilizing and trying to go to the back to the new normal. North America is still suffering a number of lower calls, a little bit less than in the rest of the world, predominantly because of the blank sailings. There's a lot of blank sailings coming out of going to Northern America specifically. But the situation in Africa and in Latin America is obviously very different because we are lagging a little bit behind on the wave. So if you then look to the Latin American trends, you can effectively see that the impact is still arriving, is still rising. We still have weekly changes. The Latin America trends as a whole, they see a decrease in vessel calls, volume, similar to what we have seen in Europe. But the main issue is there's a lot of issues with logistics across the border, cross-border logistics. Similar issues in Africa. They didn't have these types of issues in Europe. Why? Because in Europe, there was a much more coordinated response to COVID, to Corona. Here, it is very much country dependent. So you can also see the restrictions that are present in the overall Latin America trends, that they are not necessarily applicable to Brazil. For instance, this cross-border logistics, we don't really see these issues. This decrease in vessel calls is fairly limited in the Brazilian market because the export effectively, despite all forecasts, is effectively growing, is what we see. Yeah? And then also the shortage on port workers today in Brazil, this is not, not the situation so far. Let's hope it stays that way. If you could go to the next slide. This is just showing you the numbers of UNCTAD on the global trade forecast. So you see a significant drop in volumes. This significant drop will be much stronger in the containerized business. So if you're looking to the bulk markets and the general cargo markets, this drop is not as present. You can also see that the global commodity prices have dropped on average about 20%. However, the main export products, except for oil and gas of Brazil, have only dropped 4%. So this is also an indication why the Brazilian market is relatively stable when it comes to exportations. In principle, the countries that are exporting more than importing, so far they are seeing lesser effects. So, and if you could then go to the next slide, please. This is more related to what strategy are ports choosing? How are they preparing, or what do they believe will be part of the new normal? Similar to what I mentioned before, the first level focus will be very much on exportation. You also see this in the US. They're putting a lot of efforts on restarting their exportation. Everybody is expecting a differentiation in the supply chain, in the sense that a country will not be willing to be 100% dependent on one specific country. Because you see this cascading effect, for instance, of the current role of China in global supply chain. So as part of the risk differentiation and diversification, we believe in general that there will be a diversification in the supply chains as a whole. Within the landlord model ports, similar to Porto do Açu, and so we rent out our area to third parties based on a fixed land lease fee per square meter. You see that the majority of the landlord ports, they have already started opting of elaborating their business case. So adding different revenue streams to their base business case of port calls and land lease revenues or concession fees. We believe that this trend will be accelerated because there will be new opportunities for innovative solutions or even more sustainable solution. And clearly there's also a very strong push towards digitalization within the overall supply chain. So trade facilitation, etc., because obviously this transparency and digital information will make your supply chain more transparent, predictable, and will allow you to react in a proper way faster, rather than to be facing the consequences. So you can have proactive mitigation measures in case something goes wrong in the supply chain. So therefore, this digitalization is under a strong push as well from IAPH and the ports in general. But in principle, I think I can say that the ports that I've been talking to, at least, they're quite optimistic. They're quite optimistic about different ways of returning to the new normal. Obviously, all of us, all the port community is super happy that the majority of the ports are able to stay open, maintain their business, and play our essential role in the global supply chain. So that's pretty much it from my end as an intro, giving you an overview of what is IAPH, what are the different ports doing, what is the task force, and what are the trends that the ports are looking at.
Okay, thank you, Tessa. Congratulations for your presentation. And well, some points that I'd like to destack, that I'd like to point here about some conclusions that your report has stated, is that the new role for ports, and especially the importance in the port-city relationship. There was some debate about that in the last few years, especially here in Brazil, in South America. That concept has already been established in North America, in Europe, in the Far East, but in the South America, it was a veil being developed. In this crisis, in this pandemic crisis, you see this veil, it has been reinforced, or it would be that a thing that will be more developed, more straight, it will be more consolidated in the next months?
Well, from the perspective of Porto do Açu, we are very closely interconnected and interknit with our local community. As I mentioned to you before, about 70% of the people that are working in Porto do Açu come from the region. We also believe that by developing the port, through the growth in the port, we will have job creation, etc. So for us, this is part of the vocation. We want to grow together with the cities. We want to grow and create opportunities for the people living in the cities. So this is really our role as community builder. Obviously, it is clear that by generating port activity, industrial activity, there is a potential for impact on the city, on the community. And this is where our location and our size comes in very, very handy. So Porto do Açu is a large port. We are 130 square kilometers in size, which is equivalent to the island of Manhattan, which is the same size as the Port of Antwerp. 40 of that is our nature reserve, it's Carwara, which is also part of our port city dialogue. And then obviously we also have a lot of social programs. But next to that, we are already working on preventing congestion. Because obviously if you're living in close to a port area, this is the main effect that you see. The roads are blocked, there's trucks everywhere, correct? For Porto do Açu, what we've been doing is working on what we call REJ 244, which connects the port directly to BR 101 and would loop around the city, so get the heavy traffic out of the city. So
that's your main roadway access.
Yeah, so for now, our main access is indeed via the road, but we are also working on the EF 118, which would effectively close the loop. So you could go from Porto do Açu to Rio de Janeiro to Sao Paulo to Minas Gerais to Vitória and back. So you would open up that region for rail transportation as well. And obviously, because of the draft and the infrastructure that we have available, larger vessels could call Porto do Açu, and then the volumes could be expanded through the other regions. So for us, taking care of our connectivity as a whole and the potential impact it has on the local community and balancing this now before it becomes an issue is very important. Having an open dialogue with the Prefeitura today on how we are handling Corona, what preventative measures we are taking, what procedures we are having. This is an open dialogue with them, because obviously we have information from the maritime port community and so on, and they have information from health agencies, etc., governmental bodies. So it only works if you work together.
And this kind of partnership, this kind of action, but from the port, do you see it? Do you see it very usually when you look at South America, when you look at Latin America, also?
Well, I think for now, Porto do Açu is really trying to be quite proactive in that. I can't really comment on how other ports are approaching this issue, but all I can say for us, it is essential in our license to grow and our license to develop, and it is really embedded in our DNA and the way we like to do business.
Okay, and now about one of your main points in your presentation, you told us about the Worldport sustainability program and the importance to point the best practice that has been developed in ports in Europe or North America and Far East. What could you destack? What could you point as some of the best practices that are being made or that are being in other countries, in other ports, and some practice that could be followed up or could be copied here in Brazil by Brazilian ports?
Well, in reality, the Worldport Sustainability Program, it has two sides to it. So they have a number of working groups, so ports working together. They have one on clean fuel for shipping, which in my previous career I was chair of. And they also have, for instance, the Environmental Shipping Index. They have a working group on onshore power supply, on trade facilitation, etc. So these working groups is ports working together to create something, to create guidance, to create leadership, a sort of a think tank type of initiative. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, they also have a website where all ports of the world can upload their sustainability programs or specific projects. So it has a huge amount of information available. So if you, as a port or as a maritime player, are facing a sustainability issue and you're looking for inspiration, you can effectively go there. And what they do on an annual basis, they sort of reward the front runners in the 5 different categories. And Porto do Açu was lucky enough to be nominated in the category of safety and security because we presented a project to them related to our emergency readiness and response when the oil spill happened, the unknown oil spill happened in August 2019. So all our preparation, collaboration with governmental and institutional, but also with our clients, and we were, shortlisted. So I'm still hoping for some positive news in the next few weeks. It was planned to be announced at the Worldport conference, in March, but obviously this one got cancelled and is now postponed until June 2021. I hope that the awards will not have to wait until then, and I'm actually expecting some news concerning that in June. But it would be great to be able to attract a prize like that to Brazil, because we are the only Latin American port that is effectively nominated in any category. So I really want to take this award home back to Brazil and back to Latin America, because you can also see that, and this is then from my personal point of view, in the relationships with the different ports, that they do see inspiration, and they do get inspiration from Latin American ports. It's not just us taking from others, it is really a balanced relationship, and this is amazing to be part of course.
Well, we also hope to have good news by Porto Sul and that you get this award. Yes, let's cross our fingers. In your report, you have also stated that when we talk about the impacts of the coronavirus outbreak here in Brazil, in the Brazilian ports, we had concern about the international trade, the fall of international trade, the decrease, and also some internal aspects like the interconnectivity, the interlogistics, the supply chains that's linked to the port, and also some impact in the professional aspect, in the workers, the port workers. If they get the coronavirus, well, we'll have a shortage of workers to act at the port, the workforce of the port workforce. Well, in your presentation, you have stated that some of those concerns were not so necessarily. We have well, when you analyze the exportation, you have a less impact. In the imports, you have a lot of impact, but also with the shortage of workforce here in ports, you have even stated that the main problem was also that some workers were being sent to home because there wasn't enough work to be done. With the recuperation, with the flexibilization, the return to normalcy in Europe and North America, what do you see as an impact in the Brazilian ports? Do you see this back to normalcy will be a faster process here in Brazil than was in Europe or North America?
So to come back to the trends in Latin America, so the responses within the port perimeter or the port perimeter survey, it has about 28 different ports of the region. And we see that there is a high response rate in Mexico, Peru, and Colombia. So this distorts a little bit the trends. As I mentioned before, the Latin American trends we don't necessarily see today at the level of Brazil. Like for instance, the logistics, like for instance, the restraints in terms of availability of port workers and port laborers, etc. When it comes to understanding what is going on in Brazil, I think if you compare to what is going on in the more upper end of Latin America, we're doing quite okay. With relation to your question of going back to the new normal and when it will occur, or if it will occur faster in Latin America or in Brazil in comparison to the other European countries, I think this is like a crystal ball type question. But from my point of view, I hope that we can learn from the best practices from the European ports going back to normal. And that in case something goes wrong, we can learn not to do that. I'm hoping this is not the case, and I understand and I know that they're doing a lot of preparations and a lot of analysis to do it as safe as possible. But getting back to normal, I don't think it is a question to do it as fast as possible. I think the main question is to do it as safe as possible. So rather than forcing the speed, I would prefer to be a little bit more conservative and do it in a safe manner and take as little risk as possible to ensure that everybody involved, employees, stay safe and that the operation can continue, because these are the main factors that we need to take into account. So being the fastest is not necessarily the best idea. I think being the one with the most thought process, as much as possible, learning from others, and being as risk adverse as possible, I think this is the favored approach today.
And following your point now, and talking about some semantics here, is it correct to say back to normalcy? Will come back to something, or no, that will be a new reality? And what do you expect of this new reality that will go and not go back?
Yeah, I fully agree with you. I don't know what the new normal is, but going back to business as usual as we know it, I think will be quite difficult and maybe not even desirable. We also see within the workforce of Porto Mar, they're doing amazing working from home. So I believe in principle, the working from home will be much a part of the new normal. Because we see that it works, the technology allows it, etc. We're doing a lot of business meetings through Zoom, through video calls and so on. So why do you need to take an international plane? So I think there will be a balance between what we are doing today under crisis circumstances that prove to work very well and try to integrate that or keep that going into the new normal. But let's see what the new normal will be.
Last week, we organized a webinar, and with us was the president of Pianchi, Mr. Francisco Esteban Lores, and he stated that in the post-crisis, certainly the ports will give a much more importance to digitalization, even more importance that has already been given to it. That will be a new, if you have a new normal, will be that ports will depend more about digitalization, and also has to begin to discuss cybersecurity because of that dependency. What's your opinion about that?
I fully agree with you that digitalization will get a new impulse and be accelerated as much as possible around the ports globally, because it's an essential tool in being proactive rather than reactive, solving a problem prior that it becomes like a larger problem. So within the COVID task force, in reality, we are preparing a recommendation that will be presented to IMO together with some of the other international institutions and international associations to show them the importance of digitalization. Digitalization, of course, it's not an easy subject in the sense that you have so many different stakeholders that come into play that need a certain bit of the information in a certain way. So it's not always so easy to bring the collective all on the same page, but I do believe in its benefits, and I do believe that this will become absolutely more important going forward, as you stated as well.
Okay, and another point in your report was that the role that port administration or the port will have to get as a business developer in this time of crisis, and with the international trade being impacted and severely impacted, especially for in the container ship trade, especially. What do you see this importance? What will be the role that the port administration, the port authority, will have to implement when you see this? The port to have to be a business leader, will have to foment business, especially in the landlord model. Could you give more details what you are thinking about that?
Well, I think a port, if you look at the ecosystem of maritime business, I think the port is a very big node and heavily interconnected with, you know, ports on the other side of the world, the logistics companies to the hinterland, and the companies that are resident in your port. I think as a port, it is your role to understand what your customers need and what your prospects need, to be able to be competitive, to be able to grow and to stay relevant. Part of that understanding is also understanding, okay, what do they need in addition? What do they need in addition to be more sustainable? What do they need in addition to have transparent and easy access to information and things like that? So this entrepreneurial spirit of ports, I think it's innate to being a port. However, I have to be very clear, I am absolutely biased because clearly I work for Porto do Açu. And Porto do Açu is a young developing port, and how we develop business is effectively in that way. We work together with prospects. We try to understand their business. We can see what we can offer to them because we are a very entrepreneurial and obviously a private port. So
in the case of
perhaps
Porto
my
do Açu,
disposition is a little bit
essential.
different than it is.
It's an essential value in the case of Porto do Açu.
Absolutely.
You were created with that business model or based in that business model. But to foment business, what is the aspect of developing new technology or to develop innovation? Will that be also objective for port authorities?
Well, I think today, no company can live without innovation. No company can live without looking into new technologies. If you look to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations that all companies are facing, balancing their financial gains with the natural and the social capital, to answer that question, to have a long-term future, you need to be innovative. You need to be creative. You need to think outside of the box to find better solutions. So, and for us as Porto do Açu, obviously we do that because we create business, or we try to create business. Yeah.
This will be objective. It will be a time of smart ports. And another aspect in your report was the new posture of the countries, especially in the economics and also the strategic of their supply chains. If the coronavirus outbreak has shown what is important is that you can't depend on just one country for your industries or for some specific sectors, as the pharmaceutical sector or the medicines sector. Do you see with this concern some drawback in globalization? Will have some economies more closer, or you have a market more diversified? Well, we don't depend only of China. We'll have to open some markets in Africa, in Europe, and North America, and South America. What will be the follow-up to that? A hard attack on globalization, or no, an increase even in globalization?
Well, I think it will be a balanced approach. So the globalization will be different because it will be more diversified. So if you're balancing your supply chain through different countries, you still have this effect of globalization. But I believe it will be balanced somewhat with local production as well. I think every business will assess the risk or the reality or the real potential of a breakdown of a supply chain as a much bigger business risk than they did 6 months ago. And this will have an impact on their strategies and how they manage and mitigate this risk. From my point of view, it would be a balance between diversifying between different countries and even venturing into local production.
Okay, we have here a question of Mr. Alberto Pinheiro Carvalho about, it deals with the port city relationships, about how the Port of Açu have dealt with the local restrictions in relation to the circulation of people imposed by the municipality of São João da Barra. It deals exactly with the impact in the workforce of the port. How was dealt?
So as I mentioned, we have a very open relationship, open dialogue with them to understand, okay, what are their concerns related to the security, let's call it that, of people. So we try to follow that as much as possible. So far, we haven't had any issues with port laborers, dependent on the terminal or whatever, what they need to do in the port, to being stopped or being entering in the port, because we share our procedures, our protocols, our best practices with the city council in an open dialogue to get their feedback, to see if it mitigates the risks that they're seeing and so on. But so far, we haven't had any issues with people being denied access to the port. This is not the case. Obviously, if you look at the numbers, the amount of people that are in the port on a daily basis today in comparison to pre-crisis, okay, that's a very big difference. This is normal, eh?
Mm-hmm. About let's begin to talk about what can we expect of post-crisis now. You said that in Europe, the ports are beginning to come back to the normal, to the normal operation. In North America, there was a decrease, okay, but it has stopped. It's lower, but it has stopped to decrease. So in the next months, in the next weeks, we'll have a beginning of increase in the port operations in Europe and North America, with positive impacts also in the port operations in Brazil as a trade partner. So what do you expect in those positive impacts in Brazil, and what can we expect of the second semester of the year? Do you see the possibility to increase in operations? So we'll get closer to what can we say? What can we describe as normalcy?
Well, I think if you're listening to the container shipping lines, and if you're looking at the ports that are very big in containers, for them, the crucial factors will be the impact of the blank sailing and what will happen in the third quarter. The third quarter will be very, very important for them to then see, okay, how long will this impact last? And I think related to that, it's the timeline of the new normal. Because obviously when you have people like you and me working from home, we are consuming way less. We are spending less. So I think it is heavily connected to one another. And then for Brazil as a whole, I think we need to now understand better what is going to happen in the next few weeks, and when we will finally be able to start flattening the curve to then understand what happens after that. So for us at Porto do Açu, we are in continuous dialogue with our terminal operators, with our main clients, to understand how they are looking to the market and what they are feeling. Because today, your answer is as good as mine, as good as my husband's, is as good as anyone's answer within this room, because it's just very, very hard to predict. But what I said before as well, I think the general feeling is a feeling of optimism, a feeling of we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're doing absolutely our utmost as a port employee, as a port employer, wherever you are within this global cluster. We're doing what we can. And you are seeing that the Europeans are getting out, Asia is getting out. So there is an exit scenario. It's just a matter of buckling down now, staying at home, taking the necessary preventative and precautionary measures, etc., to flatten the curve and then to be able to get out all together. I think that is where we are now.
Yes, we have already seen that there is the end of the tunnel. You just have to get there now. And well, in your report, you have already stated some lessons that the COVID-19 pandemic has learned to us. The need for more digitalization, also the new role for ports as a business developer. What other lessons do you expect that what we'll learn more about all this crisis? What this crisis will teach us beyond the need for digitalization, this new role of the port authorities, the importance of the relationship between the port and the city? Could you point other lessons that should come of this crisis?
Well, I think a lot of effort will be made in assessing business risks and weighing different business risks, because I know about a number of ports that were absolutely ready for this type of pandemic health crisis. I know about others that were totally unprepared. And it's the understanding of having a common view of what are the true business risks, and understanding that the business risks in Asia impact the business risks in Brazil. It is seeing the interconnectivity between these different nodes within the overall maritime ecosystem. So I think this will be a first level of change. And I think the second level of change will basically be, the new normal, how we interact, how we work with one another, which will be very different or tricky in Latin American culture, because of course, we hug, we kiss, etc. And I think that will be the weirdest change to see. But I really see everybody feels that they're in the same boat. The boat is moving at a different speed because Corona is moving in a different speed in different countries. But everybody understands that we are in the same boat. So this creates a sensitivity of union and society cohesion, which is then a positive, an upside of this horrible situation that everybody is in today.
Okay, Tessa, we are in the end of our webinar, and I have just received a question about Otávio Grottoni about railroad access. In your presentation, you have already talked about the impact in the interconnectivity on the access of the ports. That was one of the areas that has been impacted by the coronavirus. In South America and in Brazil as a country, what have you noticed about the access to the ports? It has been greatly impacted, or no, in other countries as in Europe, the impact was bigger?
Well, I think for now, the logistics, the impact is relatively limited in the sense that you're still able to use the logistics. I think the bigger problem is that the demand for the logistics is lower. And then obviously a lot of the trucking companies are like a personal company. So the demand is a little bit lower. So the social impact is bigger than what you see in European countries. So I don't see the issues with the logistics. From a global point of view, I do see that in general, the rail is doing better than truck logistics. For instance, in Mombasa, they had very, very big problems with their road connectivity because of cross-boundary condition, but they moved as much as possible to the railway trajectory, ensuring the continuous connectivity of the port, and so far it seems that it worked. So the road side is more impacted internationally than the rail. But for now, I think that in Brazil as a whole, the road impact is more social than it is on availability, because the demand is effectively lower today.
Okay, Tessa Major, I again thank you for your participation in the webinar Porto Mar 2020. And you have some final comments to address, please. The time is yours.
Well, I just want to thank everybody for their participation in their webinar and for listening to me. I hope you found it interesting. And it is my duty as chairperson and vice president for the region. If you have any questions related to how to deal with Corona, or if you're looking for specific types of information, this is what I'm here for. And if you would have any questions on IAPH specifically and so on, feel absolutely free to reach out to me. I mean, I'm here as a tool, and I'm only as effective to the extent that you effectively use me. So please feel free to reach out with any type of questions that you might have. If I know, I will answer. If I don't know, I will get you the answer in a different way.
Okay, and as some of our attendees has requested, I would just say again, your email is Tessa, T-E-S-S-A .major, M-A-J-O-R, @portodoaçu.com.br. Tessa, again, thank you for your participation. It was a pleasure to talk to you about all the impacts of the coronavirus outbreak in the port sector, also in the ports international also. Again, e eu gostaria também de agradecer a todos os participantes que a edição do webinar Porto Mar 2020, que teve a participação de Tessa Major, diretora de inovação em relações internacionais do Porto do Açu, e também vice-presidente para as regiões da América do Sul e da América Central da Associação Internacional de Portos, da International Association of Port and Harbours, uma das principais entidades que reúne autoridades portuárias no mundo. Muito obrigado mais uma vez pela participação e acompanhem nas nossas redes sociais, nos nossos canais, no jornal A Tribuna e no nosso site www.atribuna.com.br sobre novidades das próximas edições do webinar Porto e Mar 2020 e também novidades no setor portuário nacional e internacional. Mais uma vez, muito obrigado, um abraço a todos, cuidem-se e até a próxima.